Good morning, Anthony. How are you?
I'm doing awesome, brother. How about you?
We have, quote unquote, flipped the mic, if that's how we want to, right? Technically, we're in the same position, just in a different software. But I'm very excited to have you on my show. You were gracious enough to have me as a guest. And you have an interesting business that I'm excited to peel apart. But it sounds like when you and I were chatting that you have a similar experience that led you to create the business that you have created. And so why don't you just give everybody just a quick flyby, Anthony, of kind of what you're doing now, kind of the couple of milestones that got you here. And we don't have to do the whole recap because then we can go back and unpack it.
Sweet. Okay, so hi, everybody. My name is Anthony Taylor. I run a company called SME Strategy. We travel around to different strategic planning offsites and help teams, work through their issues, make sure they're clear on where they want to go. We call it one destination. Yesterday, I counted that I've been at physically 17 different states to deliver our alignment program, but home is Vancouver, Canada. My technical background is I'm a waiter. I used to work in hospitality, bar, and restaurants, but in the process, I had a couple startups. I owned 2 coffee shops. I partnered with it in the ESL school. I put on, rock concerts, ESL school, coffee shop, web startups. I've written 2 books, one on strategy, one on entrepreneurship. And my business partner ripped me off for a whole bunch of money. And then I started SME Strategy to help entrepreneurs with things they don't see waiting around the corner. And that's what led me to today.
So, yeah, like we said, there's a lot to unpack, right? So where did you start to have the entrepreneurial itch? Was it embedded in your family? How did you decide that was, because the reason, Anthony, I'm asking this question kind of weirdly is I used to ask like, hey, how did you decide to become an entrepreneur? And like 9 out of 10 people are like, I never decided to, it kind of just happened. So now I'm just I ask in a different way, but I'm kind of curious how you went from waiter to like, hey, I want to actually jump in and own my own destiny.
Oh, man. Okay. So this was the plan from day one. So I've got 2 versions. The one version is I said, okay, ironically, I'm a very strategic. So I said, okay, what am I going to do? What's going to pay me the most amount of money? And they said, bartenders make the most amount of money per hour. So let's do that. What pays the most amount of money after that? It's a consultant. So let's do that. So my trajectory was always there, but I actually don't care about money. I could really care less about it. It's kind of a means to an end. But what really happened was when I was younger, my parents divorced. And one of the reasons they divorced is because both of them were teachers. My dad had to work at nighttime. My mom worked in the day, and they just weren't at the house at the same time, taking care of me and my brother at the same time. And I said, you know what? I am going to have freedom so that when I have a kid, I can spend time with them on my terms and I can spend time with my wife. So now, happily, I have a 9-month-old kid. He's amazing and he's super cool. Then I reflect on that all the time. I say, I might not have the gajillions of dollars that I would have written in my vision plan. The company's going amazing and I'm living out my dreams truly. But the reason was to have financial freedom. So I didn't tell you about the lemonade stands and the newspaper delivery and selling, glasses of Coke at a golf course and that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's always been the plan. It's always been in the DNA and it was always towards being able to have as much freedom as possible.
So, which I love because I think a lot of us do, try to control our destiny and have that freedom. And we kind of grab the dragon's tail and then we get on this roller coaster. And so how did you start with the coffee shops and how were you navigating what to focus on, what business to pick and how did you approach that?
Yeah, I'll say the coffee shop business, the ESL school business. So what happened was, and this is really, open up the door, but there was a guy who was a bartender and he came into our bar all the time and he said, hey, I've got this business and I need some help. And at the time my dad had passed and left a small inheritance to us. And I said, cool. Well, I just happen to have, seed money and I was a dumb and ambitious kid. And so I invested into this person's business, not knowing it was a scam. But sidebar, at the time, Madoff was ripping off people 10, 20, 30 times smarter and richer than me. So I feel less bad about it. But basically, there was just an opportunity. I thought it was cool. I still believe. So it was an ESL school. It was in Vancouver, and it was in 2006. it was a really good business. There were tons of ESL students, English as a second language. And so I was like, cool, this makes sense to me in my brain. And then the recession happened, tourism was shut down. And so I still think it was a good business, but the person I was working with, I think, was a little shady. So yeah. And then the coffee shop business was kind of throwing good money after bad, trying to just like parlay that into something else. We had some opportunities. We went through that. So none of it was really by choice. Per se, with the exception of when I put on rock concerts with my buddy, because we just like doing that. And I'm like, well, why don't you just make money doing stuff that you love? So yeah, alternative rock. We talked about that the last time. So yeah,
right. Yeah. That's awesome. So, we talk, you have a lot about alignment with what you're doing with your business, and we talk a lot about alignment. I'm actually doing a mini series here about that. And, what is it with your business partner where you guys didn't have alignment? And you wrote a book called I Wish I Knew. And so I'm just kind of maybe give us some of the gold nuggets as far as like, what is it that you wish you knew? And then what were some of the things that you did not see around the corner?
Oh man. Well, I wish I knew he was a scumbag. The thing that so what ended up happening, we had an accountant. And I thought the accountant was working for me or us, but he was working for him. So the accountant was fudging the numbers so that when we were looking at the reports, he was pulling out cash. So like trust, but verify is just so important. I'm a trusting person for sure, but man, like that sucked. And so I just like, one of the other lessons in the book was, get a lawyer. Like had I had a good lawyer review the contract, I would have had a better legal leg to stand on. If I had a better accountant, not a glorified bookkeeper, I would have had better information there, and they would have had like a kind of an ethical note. This person was not ethical. And so, there was just a series of things that were going on there. At the same time, I had a younger brother. He was 20 years old. They say he passed of cancer at the same time. So I wasn't 100% head into the business. I didn't have anybody looking out for my best interest. And so just kind of all three of those things conspired at the same time to a really good lesson learned. But I think patience was something that I wish I had more of. A mentor, like they say that if you give somebody a bunch of money, they're going to lose it because they didn't earn it. I didn't earn that money. I lost a good amount of it, which sucks. I didn't lose all of it, but it's a tough lesson and one that I'm just kind of trying to claw back from every day.
So that is, yeah, I could just feel it. I mean, I think there's a lot of people probably listening that have had their own partnership stuff too. And I'm curious on the passing of your brother. How did that impact your calibration of your long-term vision of what, of what you wanted for the business and what you were focused on?
I don't know if it actually had an impact, to be honest. As I think about it, like I say, hey, like what was the reflection? I mean, on one hand, I've had a lot of people pass away because my dad passed, my brother passed, my grandma passed, uncle passed, like all in a very short amount of time. And so I think it gave me a really good appreciation for people and understanding. So if, we tie it back to alignment, we tie it back to the work that I do, I can kind of see layers into people. And I've never ever said that or thought about it that way, but just like really getting to the core of what's there. It's also had me do a lot of internal work on myself just to kind of like heal and feel better, which again helps me connect with people. So the work I do in leading executives, I can really talk straight to them because I've kind of got flat with dealing with all of my own shit. And I'll tell you that, we record this in 2023, this has been 15 years of dealing with my stuff to get me to where I am now. So if you're dealing with grief, it takes a long time. It's not an easy thing. And getting ripped off is also grief. But when you come out of it, it helps give you some tools to hopefully contribute to the people around you.
So let's talk about what are those tools that you've been working on creating and leveraging to help other people see around the corner? And like, how are you taking what are the things that people need to be thinking about so that way they can make sure that they're avoiding it or staying on track to essentially what their long-term destination is?
Ooh, okay. First of all, if you want to know, you can't get to where you don't know where you're going. So one of the things,
yeah,
I advise. Well, we have that in common, but from a different kind of lens. But looking and say, hey, what is the end in mind that you want, and at a fixed point in time? A guy named Cameron Harold calls it a vivid vision, and say like, if success was a place, how would you know if you got there? So write it down on a piece of paper and say, in 2026, I will be this or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then work backwards to do that. So that's one of the things about like a forward-looking piece. One of the tools we use in our strategic planning process is a risk analysis. If you hope for the best and expect the worst, I think you have a good ability to build a plan. So in your plan, look at all of the things that are going to get in the way and then prioritize based on your risks, not on your wants. So a lot of people say, oh, we need to focus on this, or like want to focus on this. But we say, hey, focus on getting rid of those roadblocks first, so that you have a clearer path to get to where you want to get to. So those are some of the tools within strategic planning. And
I kind of think about that like barbell investing, like with Nassim Taleb. You got like cover your basics and everything that you have to, and then you've got the other side where you're able to then place your bets to get you where you want to go. As we dive into what your guys are doing now, your strategic planning, strategic planning are two words that, like, what the hell do they mean? I think a lot of people are like, I've had a couple people on over the years, Anthony, where we've talked about strategic planning, but I think specifically with the audiences that I speak in front of, it's like, hey, they picture like this 50,000 page or $50,000 binder that they created after 8 months of misery. Or it gets blended in with EOS traction. And so, like, I want to hear your definition of strategic planning. Then we can kind of synthesize this against maybe some of the other concepts that people are familiar with.
Sweet. Well, I can't wait. I'm going to clip this right now because I've never actually talked about, because there's actually so many videos from HBR and that's of what is strategic planning, and that it's a misnomer or it's a lie as far as people say. Okay, let's look at the word strategic. Strategic is just about choices. What are you doing and what are you not doing? That's it. You can't do everything. You don't have enough time, money, energy, so you have to focus. That's the strategic part. The planning means that you don't react to stuff, that you respond to things as needed, but you actually make a plan to make those choices. Entrepreneurs have shiny object syndrome. They kind of bounce from here to there to here to there. As organizations grow, it's harder to kind of navigate that ship because you have then 10 employees to lead, 30 employees to lead, 100 employees to lead. And so you can't change your mind willy-nilly. So strategic planning is just the act of looking at what choices you want to make, building a plan to executing on it, and adapting as necessary. One of the couple videos that are out there, we say, well, strategic planning isn't really planning because XYZ reason. You're not looking at constraints. You're not looking at risks. You're not looking at that. Well, that's why our aligned strategy development model actually incorporates all of those things to make strategic planning not a fallacy. If it's just, hey, here's where we want to go, let's go there, then that's just acting. And so we have to look at constraints. We have to look at the landscape. We have to look at internally. We have to look at our challenges. We have to choose, which means saying no to stuff. If you're not saying no to anything, you're not strategic planning. So that's the biggest difference with how we look at it and how we challenge teams to think differently about strategic planning.
I love that, man, because it's I for years, Anthony, it's like I think about strategic planning or like even EOS, which I love. Everything has their benefits. So as I'm about to say this, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but with EOS or strategic planning or sales and marketing or any consultants, if you're not looking at the constraints, you're just like hoping. It's like, well, I want to do this. And I'm like, what if you have no capital? Like, how are you going to fund that? What if you need the distributions and you're sucking all the money out? Then it's like you're doing this whole exercise that is just not based in reality. So how did you find that was a necessary part of the process?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer. I think so. First of all, EOS is great. Like, it's great for a lot of reasons and a lot of tools, and the foundations of what we do. Like, we didn't invent strategic planning, neither did EOS, but they're great for if you need the right tool for the right job. What we do differently compared to EOS is the people side of it, because I think people are the biggest gap to implementation, because it's not as easy as just doing a bunch of stuff. A lot of it is the mental game. A lot of it is the understanding. So if you talk about the finances, you could have somebody who's like, let's blow through all the cash. You could have somebody who's just like, let's just bring a bunch of cash in. That'll solve everything. And it's like, no, you're just going to spend it faster. So the context of people is critical to the plan. So that's one. And I just think as I look over here, I've got my bookshelf with like 40, 50, 60, 70 books, and that's an understatement. I just read a crapload and synthesized everybody's life experience. I mean, that's the great thing about doing podcasts. We're at 200 something episodes. Yours is dropping shortly, which I can't wait for.
Yeah.
But just listening to people and their life experience and my own life experience, optimism is not going to get you to where you want to go.
I'm laughing, man, because I have definitely thought that was the answer for many, many chunks of my life. And you're right. So why did you pick strategic planning as the method that you, in the topic that you wanted to talk about to help others, Anthony? Like, what was if you were to choose, and I don't know if you had other options of things you could have chose to the other horses you could have rode?
Well, first of all, I'm loving the questions. These are such good questions. So I got to say kudos to you for being a dope interviewer. So when I was in my career, and I think it was maybe 15 years ago or something, there was basically two options. One is be a consultant, and actually that's still one option. And everybody was doing social media. And I was like, okay, social media, I'm like, I don't want to be 40 or 50 doing social media. Like, it's not going to work for me. So already I was thinking long term. But what was really happening was I love business, a business degree. I was helping people write business plans. I just knew about business because I had lived it. I had loved it. I do it. And it was a passion. I was doing business plans and doing marketing plans. I'm a marketing guy by trade. And so there was kind of a confluence between marketing strategy, which is very natural. You see the social media piece, and then business plans, which is kind of more holistic. I was doing a bunch of those, and a mentor of mine said, you're going to starve charging people $500, $1,000 for business plans. You're never going to grow. You're never going to get to where you want to go. I said, interesting. At the same time, I was on the board of a couple of nonprofits, and they were ass backwards. And that's probably not very fair, but we'll call it, we had very well-intentioned people moving in a bunch of different directions. And we did an offsite. And there was a facilitator who came in and led us through this conversation. And I'm like, oh, I could do that. And so at the time, we were working to kind of solve homelessness in the downtown east side and support the business community and that kind of stuff. But I said, well, why couldn't I do this for people? And I'll tell you the last thing, and then I'll shut up for a second, is that my first client ever. So I just decided that I was doing strategic planning, which was kind of live business planning, but adapted.
Yeah.
And a client hired me in Smithers, British Columbia. That was my first client ever. Smithers, British Columbia. You can look it up. It's up north. Shout out to Summit Camps. And the flight was $675 to get to Smithers, BC in the winter. And I said, well, if they're going to spend $600 to fly me somewhere, why wouldn't, that's the same price to fly anywhere in the continental US. I could fly to Florida for that same price. So there's no reason, if these folks would pay for it, why wouldn't somebody else? And so that's why I did it. I don't work in my community. I work international. The furthest I've ever gone is I did the strategic plan for the Reserve Bank of Fiji. So the country of Fiji, their reserve bank. Yeah, I did their strategic plan, flew there. It was dope. But yeah, so just like helping.
I was going to say, well-placed client, my friend.
There are worse ones. I got a tan. I got a Bula shirt. Also, shout out to RBF. Shout out to the Bank of Fiji. Those guys are really cool. Friends that I still have to today. But yeah, it just kind of evolved in opportunities. But if you have a clear vision of where you want to go, the opportunities find themselves because you're looking for them. And I think that's another critical part of why long-term thinking is beneficial.
So, okay, yeah, I want to pull on that thread too, because I want to pull on the thread of getting that clear vision of the long-term. So, but I want to plant the seed, Anthony, about the alignment of ownership and leadership and how you're getting the people alignment. But I want to table that for a second, because I find as far as clarifying the long-term goals, I've always been a long-term thinker too. 30-year goals. And then, and it's been very fascinating for me to realize that that's not as common as I would have thought. And obviously a lot of people listening and probably think more towards that angle as well. But when you really get people to start to think long-term, you have to enable that and then help them, planting some seeds and watering it. So I'm curious on what are the challenges you see in people coming up with that long-term vision? Then I want to kind of get into then how you actually do that.
Okay. I think everybody has a different time horizon. Some people are visionaries, and we've got a friend who does the Clifton Strengths Finder out in Denver, and some people are strategic and visionary, and they think like that. That's in their strength zone. Some people are very, very detail oriented. They think short term. They look at risks, very detailed. They need every single step. So people are wired differently in their thinking. But by and large, I think most people can see 3 years down the road. A lot of people talk about 5-year strategic plans, 10-year strategic plans. We don't do them unless it's a special scenario. The University of British Columbia, we did their plan. It was 10 years. That made sense. Most people can think 3 years down the road. So it's aligning the perspective. If you think of your team or teams, if you're from a plane, you have a 30,000 foot view. You've got a big picture, not a lot of detail. If you're in a microscope, you've got a lot of detail, but not a lot of the big picture. And so it's balancing that time horizon so that everybody on your team can see enough of the picture for them to feel comfortable to say, yep, I'm going to take the next step going to that place.
Super cool, man. I love that. So then talking about the choices and because I think my experience with other people, because I've done some strategic planning engagements in the past, we don't do that. But what I found very fascinating, and this really creeps up from the EOS community of I have a strategic plan, and it's taken me years, Anthony. It's those are goals. 5 million, 10 million, that's a goal. And there's then tasks, but and how I think about this with our old business, or even the ones that our business right now is we're constantly tweaking and modifying our services and enhancing them, listening to the marketplace. But my old business is so easy because it was as an example, whereas copiers and print. And then all these industries converge from data hosting to VoIP to software automation. And then it's well, we should just do all these things because our client wants it. Right. And failure, different comp plans, different business models, different cash flow conversion cycles. And I learned that all the freaking hard way, dude. Lots of money, lots of pain, lots of yes. So when I think about the difference between goals of revenue goals and stuff versus the choices, and and I think about exercise ANSOS matrix or the BCG matrix or whatever. I'm curious for you, how maybe explain to us the choices and how do you calibrate that long-term view for someone of what the business could look like, especially if the industry is evolving, changing, and you're not just guessing. So you're probably going through a process. Is the question making some sense? I get it for sure. So okay, cool.
I've never had a hater before, but I had one person hate on our process because he said it's too simple. You need all of this stuff. And I'm for 95% of people, they don't need a complex process. They just need to figure it out. There's a famous philosopher, Ron Swanson, who says, don't half-ass two things, whole-ass one thing. And so,
please tell me you're talking about Parks and Rec, Ron Swanson. Yeah,
I was gonna say, well, yeah.
I'm 90% sure he's talking about that. Yes.
Yeah. So often, and this is what's my personal and professional opinion. It's often you're probably not going to make the wrong choice that bad because it's a coin flip. The problem is when you try to do 2 or 3 things. It's if you do that thing, it's probably going to get you close. Now, if you're a multi-billion-dollar business and you have to decide if you're going to build your next condo development or mall in Spokane or Arizona or Boise, Idaho or something like that, yes, do more data and research. But if you're kind of saying, hey, should I invest $5,000 in this training program or that training program? Or, should I be focused on sales in this area or that area? You don't need complex modeling because most of the time, the decision accuracy is not the thing that's going to hold you back. It's the execution.
How about I'm tracking you, but I want to throw something in there to hear your feedback. Is what about if it's adding different products or services? So I had a home remodeling client where it was hey, we do, kitchens and baths really well. Should we do exterior now? Or with ours, it was copiers and print. And it was essentially, I'll give you the exact example. It's hey, we sold boxes, man. And then it was hey, we're going to then sell entire technology roadmaps. Well, guess what? Copier sales reps, by the way, aren't very good at building a technology roadmap. And they're used to making huge chunks of a commission up front, not building a book of business. So I learned that after a couple $1 million and a shitload of complications and conflict.
I understand. So it's a complex answer. Okay. So I think where it goes down to is skills, abilities, aptitude, needs, and wants. So just real simple. Your company, every company has had to evolve. Okay. Every big company started off selling one thing. And it sold one thing, and if they probably did that one thing well, then they introduced a business line, either on purpose or by accident. I mean, you look at Slack started off as like an internal messaging component for like a video game. Shopify was just trying to be a ski brand store. People have these like ridiculous stories of how their companies came to be because they pivoted. Now, I'm not going to overuse the word pivot, but let's say you have a business and you say, hey, I would like to add another business line. Does it align with your organization's mission, the reason why you exist, and does it help you get to your vision, where you're going? If it doesn't, don't do it. If it does, great, do it. But if you add a business line, is your entire, and I'm going to use the word value stream, set up to do it? Do you have unique skills and capabilities and aptitudes and strengths within your total supply chain to actually deliver what you can deliver? Some of those things make a lot of sense. I'm selling hamburgers. I can sell fries. I have the infrastructure. It's a natural upsell. Let's do that. I sell strategic planning services. It might make sense to sell courses or books. If you're selling copiers, then it might make sense to sell data integrated, because then that's part of the business model. But I think the key thing, it goes down to what's the model and what's the revenue
stream. Anthony, I don't know. I'm like distracted mind. I don't know this morning, but you ever listen to Mitch Hedberg?
No, I know who they are. But...
Yeah, he's a comedian from back in the day, but he was talking about McDonald's. He's like, he said something about, we sell hamburgers and blankets. And it was just like, he's this joke about getting out of your core competency or something like that. But you're totally right. Cause like we ended up selling water filtration units. So IT services was like half a point of correlation away, but like the water services was so ridiculously out of the realm of everything you just mentioned. But we saw some consultant at a trade show would talk about it. So naturally we decided to do it because the consultants are always right. And I think about that's just a difficult process of filtering out, because you hear your peers doing it in your industry, or you hear a consultant and it's trying to figure out, okay, what is it that we're actually good at and how does this actually fit? I mean, like from their customers to your business model to your financials, I mean, everything. Go for it.
Yeah. So first of all, like F everybody else. I mean, forget everybody else. But and this is why, as a facilitator, I'm not a consultant. I don't tell people what to do. Now, for every like, hey, you shouldn't do this story, I'm sure that there's a dozen you should, and it worked out well. If you had gone into the water business and it would have been spectacularly successful because you were better at selling water than you were at copiers, you would think you were a freaking genius, whereas everybody would have told you were crazy.
Yeah.
So the people who didn't invest in Uber, the people who didn't invest in any thousands of technologies, like Monday morning quarterback's really easy. I think the key piece is, does it align with what you've got built? Because there was something, it's like, hey, I want to buy a camera. And I think it was like call it Kawasaki. Oh, I want to buy a motorcycle. Great. Well, I want to buy a Toshiba or a piano. Well, aren't you in luck? Like Kawasaki or one of those like companies builds those two very, very different things. But it's not the product that's made them successful. It's their distribution, their design thinking, their all of that stuff. Now, if you look at Apple, for example, they've built this platform that you can't escape. I've got my iPhone, I've got my iMac, I've got my watch. Those are very, very closely related products because that's their business strategy. Amazon, if you look at Amazon on its own, books digitally, shipping water things, they're very different, but that evolution took a very, very long time. They want to be the everything to everyone, and they've done it good. So I think it's just important. looking at iterative steps, making sure the jump isn't too far, not just for you, but for your customers. Because I would know you and say, hey, you're a financial expert. But if you come back and tell me, hey, Anthony, now I'm selling energy drinks, you better have a damn good reason for it. Otherwise, your customer is a totally different customer, which means it's a totally different business, which means then you're just doing two different things and half-assing two things. But some people also have multiple businesses.
It's a fantastic reply. And I think, how that actually manifests. And a decade ago, I didn't understand this because I didn't do what I do now. But what it actually does is it sucks the cash resources and your people's resources away. So people are like, oh, I'm doing this, but how many times have you heard about, I'm taking $500,000 out of company A that I have and putting it over to company B. And so they're starving all the resources from their one main mothership so they can try this other thing. And neither of them are going very well because they're both starved of resources and they're not tied to some long-term equity goal that someone has.
Yeah, I think the key part is, and again, I'm not going to, there's people way smarter than me. No, I wouldn't say, actually, there's people who are, I think, objectively dumber than me or less intelligent, more precisely, who have multiple disparate businesses and they do it just fine. They own a restaurant, like I have a client and I like him. He is smarter than me, much smarter than me. So shout out Paul in Denver. He owns a real estate development company, an alcohol company, an ice cream company, and he's got like two other things going on. And he is smarter than me, but those are very, very disparate and he makes them work. So different strokes for different folks. Some people like the challenge and the diversity, and for them, that's what they need. For me, I'm way too simple. I can't do that. And so it's just not in my strength zone or in my execution strength.
So let's take that then back to my earlier seed that I planted of getting the alignment and extracting out of the visionary founder, CEO, whatever that person is, that's kind of the helm, and then their team. How do you extract what they're good at, their mindset, what the operations and the executive team wants to do to kind of tie them to what essentially the long-term goal, making sure everybody's aligned so that way you're eliminating the flashy object syndrome and or the people that say, hey, that sounds great, but like I don't want to participate because I really like what we're doing now. I mean, obviously you got a lot of cooks in the kitchen when you're doing this.
Minnesota Timberwolves, they're building a team based on their strengths, based on their coaching to accomplish their goal. And sometimes it takes a long time and sometimes you can do it really fast. Now, I say Minnesota Timberwolves because you're in Minnesota, but any sports team is a good example. You have to make sure you've got the right personnel to complement each other. Your CEO style is different than mine, probably similar, but different. Someone else's is going to be different. Some people are command and control. Some people are very democratic. Some people are big picture thinkers and they need people to clean up their messes. Some people are super detail oriented finance dudes and gals. And, it works. It's about building the right team to accomplish the right dream. That's cheesy, but I'll put it on a t-shirt. And so you just need to make sure you got the right people in the right seats at the right time, Jim Collins, to get you to where you want to go. And depending on the vision, it's going to be different. I'll reference Cameron Harold real quick. He was working for 1-800-GOT-JUNK, I think it was. He was the COO. And once the company got to $1 billion, he got let go. Not because he wasn't good, because he wasn't the guy. And this is his story, so definitely not mine. Great interviewee, by the way. But it's just interesting that even at that level, you could be super good, but you might not be the right person. And you might not have the right people on your team to get you from point A to point B. Some people are great startup, scrappy people. Some people are maintain people. Some people are growth people. And some people are transformation people. And so you got to recognize who you've got and what they want to do. If you've got maintenance mode people and you try to put them in a scrappy startup mode, they're not going to be successful because it's not in their strength zone to do it.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, I love that. I've got another concept I want to volley back your way because I think as we then get into the constraints, Anthony, and part of the themes that I've been really riding this last half year to a year is ownership. The people that own the financial asset have to figure out what the hell they want. So like, again, I love how you said at a fixed point in time, we need to reverse engineer the normalized EBITDA and the equity valuation that we want, because then we'll be able to see the roadmap on the way there financially, right? At least like a base case. But what I think is the crucial about that point A and point B filter is the ownership group has to determine how much freaking distributions that they want on the way to that point B, because then that's going to identify how much capital we can reinvest, because you got to pay your taxes. So essentially we're trying to get to this like, hey, how much capital do we have to generate what value over what period of time? It's just, we have to start there. And the reason I say from the ownership side, because then when you get to like a process like what you're doing, what do we have available? And I'm curious, like, let's say you had that laid out. Like, hey, point A, point B, here's what we've got for reinvestment. Then as you were relating to then the people, the types of people that you have, and then also or is it? Oh, I'm sorry, shit. It's the types of people, but then also the stage of the business that you were talking about. Whether you're high growth, which consumes capital. So I'm going to, speak finance-y on the way. So growth consumes capital, maintain. You might have more cash flow because you're not consuming it, but that will be impacted based on what the owner wants. Mm-hmm. So how do you factor in those constraints? Because so many people that I've come across don't, and it's like they do that whole strategic planning process, and it's like, well, the owners are sucking all the cash out, and so this is all just bullshit. Like they just made up all these goals. Does that make sense? Like, yep. I'm curious on how you guys go through that.
I just did a video about communication and communication disconnects. Okay. And it talks about the misalignment of wants, needs, and desires. So your actions have to back up your goals. If you want high growth, well, you got to pay for high growth. Think about like a spaceship going into space. It uses 90% of its fuel just getting out of the atmosphere. Okay. So that is kind of the same thinking. The first thing that came to mind, if you want high, the mentality of the people, my self thing, and don't at me, but architects might not, or artists might not love working with you because what drives them is not the bottom line. Whereas if you work with private equity, their only measure of success is that thing. So that's what they're aiming for. So if you're not aiming at anything, going back to my original kind of posit that you're never going to get there, you need to make sure that you're giving enough energy to the thing you're going to accomplish. Last thing I'll say about this, because I talk in metaphors if you haven't gathered.
I love it.
If you're trying to drive 1,000 miles away, do you have enough gas to get you to that 1,000 miles? If you don't, change the destination or get more money for gas. And so you just need to have realistic.
So awesome.
Yeah, just need a realistic expectation for where you want to go. The number one way to kill your team's motivation is to not give them the resources they need to be successful, because they will know it's already a lost cause and they're going to give up. So anyways, if there's disconnect,
that's perfect, dude.
Okay.
And the reason I was laughing so much is in the Intentional Growth Academy, the entire metaphor that I use is, what is the target equity valuation you want at a point in time? Anthony, I'll have to send you a picture of this, but I put a point B out there, and then I actually have a car as point A, and the car is the company, and I have a green gas tank, and the green gas tank is the working capital. And then I have milestones, which are the years, and then the 2 lanes are salary and distributions. So like you were spot on. But what's so funny, Anthony, of how ridiculously common it is that what you're talking about is in one of my most recent Vistage workshops, and it was a key executive workshop. I'm like, raise your hand if you have an ownership group that is giving you like a $40 million value or $40 million revenue, because not often it's valuation. It's usually a $40 million revenue. And then the ownership group is sucking all the cash out and they still expect you to hit the goal. And laughter happens, which means think about how destructive it is for the culture and for everybody. Everybody knows like we don't have enough money to fund this growth.
Yeah. The question in a strategy session is when you have to tie resource allocation to the plan. So what most people don't want to do is, and I also joke about Minnesota Nice, is that they don't want to cause conflict. And so like it occurs as conflict by asking a challenge question. I'm a CEO. I do not like to be challenged, but when the person on my team who does it, it helps us make a better plan. So your hand should go right up. As soon as the vision is there, it's okay, great. Are we allocating sufficient resources to get us there? Otherwise, change the goal. Golden triangle, good, fast, or cheap. Pick 2. So if you want it to be good, so you have your equity evaluation, do you want it to be fast or do you want it to be thrifty? Because if it wants to be thrifty and we're going to pull the cash out, well, we might get there, but it might take us, 30 years because we're going to have to push the car across the line. Versus if you want to get there in 2 years, a la private equity, then let's put some fuel on the fire. The problem with a lot of startup businesses is they do the good and fast, but they don't have the financial or business acumen. So they end up lighting a lot of cash on fire because they're not even trying to get profit. They're just trying to get valuation. And that's where the disconnect with like startup world happens.
And I think also with the founder syndrome too is the lifestyle creep where it's above and beyond the salary and they're needing the distributions. I mean, like I have more clients than I could think of over the years, Anthony, where it's like they would have been a perfect target. This is back previous business, but like perfect target for any acquisition, entrepreneur or private equity or whoever, because the amount of distributions that they needed to maintain their lifestyle above and beyond their salary was so ridiculous that like they weren't allocating any resources into that business. And so the car in my company example was tattering and they had all these expectations. And I'm curious on like, how do you guys actually go into that? Because like you're connecting it to the constraints, and that's one of my biggest concerns about other systems out there. It's like they're not tying it to that. So how do you guys go about making sure that I'm assuming the constraints could not only be the cash, but it could be the skill sets of the people. Because like to your point, there could have been people in my old industry, the water division would have been perfectly made sense. And actually, I do know a couple companies where they did based on just the people. So how do you assess the constraints and whether that company is capable of achieving what they want based on the constraints that they have?
Okay, well, since we're almost 50 minutes into our interview, people have probably gathered I'm a no bullshit kind of guy. Then here's my no bullshit answer to the first part of the question is, if it's a kind of person who is sucking cash from the business, they're probably not spending $40,000, $50,000 to have a strategy meeting in the first place, because they'll see that as a cost versus an investment. So most of those people aren't talking to us because it's just expensive to get all your senior leaders in a room and to ask them what they want. So they probably won't even waste the air of asking their senior executives what they want, because if they did and they kept doing dumb shit, that the executives would leave because they say, well, it doesn't matter what I'm saying, I'm going to get out of here. So that's the first thing. We don't encounter many of those because they're putting the money up, they're putting the energy up, they want it to happen. But in terms of the people, it's, you're going to share a vision, and the vision is going to be there. And either the people are going to want to go there and they'll stay and they work, or they won't want to go there and they'll quit. And I have, like, not surprisingly a lot, but through the strategic planning process, I see people quit either because they don't want to go to that vision, which is fine because it raises the bar and they don't want to lift that bar, or they don't think they can. Or along the journey, they say the leader is not holding up their end of the deal. I'm putting all of this work in. I'm doing everything. My team is doing everything, but the boss, they're not doing their thing. So I'm not following this leader anymore to get to where they want to go. I'm leaving the journey and I'm going to go somewhere else where I have more trust. We had someone that we knew recently. They did their strategic plan. Actually, they didn't do their strategic plan. They set their vision in isolation. They rolled it out to the team, and then they lost their COO because they didn't get buy-in. The COO said, I'm not going here. This is not what I signed up for, and I'm out. And it didn't take very long. So if you see people quit managers, not jobs, that's why. So you got to back it up.
No, I love it. And how about pulling that thread a little bit further is I'm thinking about family businesses where you have multiple generations, or like a really, that's a 2-day topic in itself, right? But just bear with me for a second. So families where there's multiple generations and potentially different visions, and I can use mine and my dad's example, but also partners, Anthony, and then also like ownership versus executive. And what I'm thinking is like, as owners, and so see if I can clarify this even better, is as a founder will kind of move more toward the ownership role where it's like, hey, this is more of an investment. I have more say in the distributions, the long-term resource allocation, and maybe have a COO, CFO, CMO or something like that, because they're kind of moving away. But yet they have a lot of ego tied to, hey, I've been in this industry for 30 years. And by the way, I know exactly what to do about this. And, so like you have this like actual separation of roles where there's operationally more executive leadership and some smart people, but there's people that want to just stir the pot because of they might deserve to be able to stir the pot because they've been in the industry long enough, or they succeeded at a period of time in an industry that had a specific kind of demand. But now things are changed, and maybe their past experience isn't as applicable as they might think. Am I making some sense here?
Kind of. Well, here's what I think. So basically, get out of the freaking way if you're going to get out of the way. And like, I have somebody in one of our clients who I'm like, hey, I'm thinking about you. So I'm not going to call them by name because that wouldn't be very nice, but get out of the way. Because if you're going to put an executive team in place, and let them do their fucking job. Pardon my language.
Yep.
But it comes down to alignment. Whether that's with partners, you need to be aligned on the same thing. Biggest problem that I see is partners aren't aligned. If they might be aligned here, but are they aligned here? If you think about it with a marriage, you get divorced, not when you got married right away, but 10, 15 years later, because it's not turning out how you thought it would be. An executive team, same thing. They need to be aligned. They need to stay aligned on the same page. And then with a owner who's moved on to chairman of the board or president or whatever, and you've got a CEO, you got to get out of the way of that person. Otherwise, you're just actually making it worse for them, not better. You're not helping. So it comes down to trust. It comes down to alignment, and that needs to be fostered over time for anything to be successful.
How do you get those people? Do you give them a different stick and a different carrot to like give them a purpose and an identity outside of the business, or do you kind of nudge them in a certain direction, or give them some resources, or do you just give them the truth serum like you're dishing out today?
I can't make anybody do anything. Like I can't. And that's why I won't ever give somebody a strategic plan. That's why I won't ever give them a vision. I say, this is your plan. You said you wanted this, not me. I just asked you the question. So you're either going to the same place or you're not. And going to a different place is fine. I'd rather know now than 4 years from now. That's why you should do premarital counseling. But by the way, my wife's awesome. We're 5-year anniversary in a week. But the point of that is, you got to have those conversations. The reason why I kind of joke that I only show up to $40,000 meetings, because they're expensive. But if you're running a business that's 10, 20, 50, $100 million, that time and energy is a drop in the bucket compared to every single decision every single person in your company is going to take for the next 3 years. It's a drop in the bucket. And so,
yeah, I love that, dude. And you know what? There was I can't remember how it was put, but like strategic planning greases the wheels of decision making or something along the lines like that. We're like, yeah, because like I think about how many meetings people have just trying to figure out where the hell we're going. It's just like how much wasted time is just spent like that. So
spinning around in circles is what we call it, the multiple destination trap. If you don't know where you're going, you end up spinning around in circles and you don't go anywhere. And then you get frustrated, you get apathetic, people quit.
And that's going back to Google Maps. That's when Google Maps is just spinning. I'm like, nope. It's we're having a seizure here. So with strategic planning, you know, my partners are helping me with this because stay focused, Ryan. You go do the podcasting and the content and all that stuff, and we're going to continue to execute and stay focused. What is the balance, Anthony, between staying focused, listening to the marketplace, pivoting, iterating, you know, especially depending on the stage of business, that might be more important or less important. But how do you, like, as you're staying involved, or I don't know if you stay involved over time, but how do you suggest people reassess or take inventory of where they're at based on the previous strategic plan that they might have done?
Yeah, my non-answer to that is it depends on how frantic you are. If you're frantic and out of control, it's probably not a good idea. If it's measured and calculated, it probably is. And there's the difference between reacting and responding. And so we recommend people do their full strategic plan review once a year. They do a kind of quarterly review to make sure the progress is there. And they talk about the direction monthly. So if you are on a journey and you're going way far off course, you don't want to be going on that journey for months and months and realize, oh, we're aiming at the wrong place. So making sure that you're continually staying aligned and having those alignment conversations. But there's going to be times you have to respond. You know, COVID, that was one of them. That was one of the times where you had to go, boom, drop everything. Bank failure, you're just like, boom, drop everything. A big customer has a great opportunity, boom, drop everything. There are those times. But there's working on the business and in the business. And you need to have a good balance of both to keep you strategic, which means you're making the right choices at the right time to get you to where you want to go.
So let's talk about, thank you for filling in my blank there. And let's talk about Chat GPT. And I think that is one of those milestones where there are certain businesses that are probably overreacting right now. And there are probably some probably more businesses that are not reacting fast enough based on how it might impact their industry and their situation. So how do you, maybe some of your clients are an example, how would you take something that's a novel resource like that kind of changes everything potentially? How would you suggest people take that into consideration?
Oh man. Okay.
And by the way, just to give you a little bit of knowledge, I'm not saying, hey, give us every answer you think about chat specifically. I'm just thinking about.
Of course. I think it's going to be different for everybody. Some people are early adopters. Some people are late adopters. Some people will put their head in the sand and ignore it. And new technology sometimes can be a distraction, and sometimes you're an innovator, and sometimes you're a laggard. I don't think there's a right thing. You're going to do what you're going to do. If you're smart, you got people on the team to look at it for you and present a use case, business case. I'm not touching it, maybe at my own detriment, but I'm cool. As in, I've got my plan. My plan doesn't include Chat GPT. I don't see it as important enough. Whereas some people might say, oh, this is the hot new thing. It's shiny object syndrome. I try to avoid it.
And would your suggestion be whether it's that, and again, that was kind of an example that's top of mind, but anything that's particular to an industry, just then incorporate into the monthly check-ins, quarterly check-ins, as long as they're not frantically doing the whiplash and changing direction immediately without communicating with people?
Sometimes it happens. You need to, but is it core? Bring it up, discuss it, talk about it. If it's critical, test it, work through. As long as you have a system for communicating things like that, trends is kind of the high level. We include that in our strategic plans. Then you're probably covering your bases. I had a conversation with today, and I have to wrap up soon, about like ESG, environmental sustainability. And so it's becoming more and more important to this organization's supply chain, and it's no longer optional. Well, okay, great. Let's incorporate it. Let's move with it. But if we just dropped everything, it probably wouldn't work for the business either. So it's finding the right balance for you.
Got it. All right. A couple last questions as we wrap up. Is there any question that I should have asked that I'm not asking?
Oh, man. I think the only thing would be, how can you bring up the conversations about misalignment with your team? Because it's uncomfortable. So what I tell people is focus on the process. Don't focus on an individual. Don't blame your CEO. Don't blame an executive. Just be like, hey, are we on the same page about this? Do we see this the same way? We have a scorecard to do that because it's uncomfortable. Focus on the process and not the person. And then I think that's probably the biggest one, just being able to call it out and feel comfortable. If there was one thing I'd want any leader to create with their team is psychological safety. If they create that safety, then it has the space for people to present something like GPT or any other kind of challenges without being shot down right away, but creating a good system to filter opportunities.
Ooh, that was good, my friend. So last question, and then we'll get your contact information. Last question is the word intentional. I love it. It's the name of the show. And based on what you do, I'm very interested to hear your definition of what the word intentional means.
You've got a core intent, and you make sure you deliver on it. If it's not delivering on your intent, why are we wasting air?
Then where can people find you?
Anthony C. Taylor on the internet, SMEstrategy.net. You can listen to Ryan and I's podcast on the Strategy and Leadership podcast. And then if you're looking for a strategic planning facilitator, somebody to come to your meeting, make sure it stays focused and on track, you can reach out to us there as well.
Anthony, thank you so much for coming on the show, my friend. This has been a lot of fun.
It's my pleasure, brother. I hope we can do this again and for several more hours. Let's just do it.
I love it.
Thanks, dude.